Are you looking to build a website or mobile application? Well, I'm Dan Melnick, and I'm the founder of Zeng. And I started this company because I had trouble finding good developers. I partnered with Qasim Masood, and he's in Pakistan. I'm in Austin, Texas, to offer cost-effective software development. We work in U.S. hours, and we're very efficient. We've worked with some of the top companies that you might recognize, like Last Media and AppSumo, and we'd love to help you out as well. So check us out, myzeng.io.
Hey, good morning, Sai.
Morning. Thanks for your presence on my show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I've gone through your profile. I can see you're doing a lot of work. I saw your Twitter, I saw your LinkedIn. So I thought to tell about your work to my audience.
Sure. So look, I'm an independent consultant, and I work with AWS with a particular focus on security. And within security, which can mean a lot of things, I focus on IAM, or identity and access management. That's kind of my key thing.
So you work individually.
Yeah. So I was a consultant for nearly 10 years, and before that I was a developer working with AWS. So I did that for a long time, and I finished that up late last year, and so now I'm just kind of doing my own thing and exploring some of the more, for me anyway, interesting parts of AWS.
So you're from?
Sorry?
You're from?
Yeah, so I'm from Brisbane, Australia. Originally I was from Sydney, and I've spent some time in some other countries, but right now I live in Brisbane.
So you have been developer and you have done different roles before, and now you have become an individual contributor and helping different businesses.
Yeah, correct. Still working some of that out, but at the moment, yeah, just doing working as kind of an independent consultant.
So why security in AWS? Is there any specific reason?
Yeah, definitely. Look, it took me a long time to work it out. I was kind of embarrassed in the end, but AWS IAM, Identity and Access Management, it's the only service that you absolutely have to use on AWS. So from my perspective, my history, I was writing a lot of serverless applications, and that's where, you have like a function as a service like AWS Lambda, and you have to assign that a role so that it can talk to the other services, things like databases and all that good stuff. And I realized that I didn't actually know as much about IAM as I thought I probably should, given how important it is. It's pretty critical. It's one of those services which is very easy to get working, from a functional perspective, but to actually get it working correctly, following least privileges and things like that, that's actually really hard. And it was a couple of years ago now that I realized I hadn't actually sat down and really understood what was going on. And, the more I learned about it, the more amazing this service is, because, every AWS request to whatever AWS service you can name is going to go through IAM at some stage, because you need to be checked to see, hey, are you actually authenticated? Are you who you say you are? Or, do you have authorization? Do you actually have permission to do the thing that you're trying to do? And IAM is part of all of that.
So you're helping businesses in helping their security related things.
Yeah, definitely. So making sure that, they're not just using what we call in AWS IAM kind of star, which is like all actions on all resources. This is kind of this is what the admin, policy is, the admin access policy. And look, we've all used it at some stage, and it definitely makes things work. But you don't want to necessarily be relying on that all the time, especially in production, because it means if something goes wrong, it's going to go wrong in a very bad way. And so this is where this idea of least privileges come along. You should, refine your policies. And I published a book, just a self-published book, about, the service itself. So this kind of was my way of trying to help as many people as possible basically learn from a lot of the mistakes that I made over the 10 years or so that I've been using, probably closer to 15 years or so that I've been using AWS. Maybe not quite 15.
So you have been into AWS from a long time. You have explored different services. Before that, you have worked for the development of applications. So, what that particular point that made you to come into IAM and tell the companies the importance of it, and there must be a strong reason.
Yeah. No, good question. So yeah, I started out using AWS, I think it was maybe 2011, and that was actually before IAM was available. It wasn't actually a service. Actually, no, it might have been around 2010. I was working at a startup actually in Canada, and we were trying to do the right thing and follow the best practices, but it was a lot harder back then. You ended up sharing a lot of access keys and secrets and things like that, things that I would definitely not recommend people do today. But hey, it was different back then. There wasn't very many AWS services. And it wasn't really until I started building, like I said earlier, more serverless applications that I realized that, it's not too hard to get things working, which is good. You want to be able to actually solve the business problem that you're trying to solve as a developer. I always like to say, as a developer, your job is not actually to write code. Your job is to solve business problems. And so I was doing that. But then I realized eventually after many years that I'm not doing it in the most secure way. And this will work, but if something goes wrong, either I write some bad code or some, secrets get leaked, this could be very, very bad because, I've given something way too many permissions. So that's when I started writing my book, and I published that, and, just had a lot of conversations. And so for me, I think it was really, like I said, building serverless applications, because you basically just have your code and then it runs in the cloud. You give your code to, in this case, AWS, but it could be any of the other cloud providers as well. And you say, run my code under these circumstances when this event happens with these permissions. And I just, like I said, I realized I hadn't actually thought about those permissions very much. And then once I started digging into it, I started to realize, just how much work IAM does. It just handles millions and millions of requests a second. And also just how much harder it was than I thought it was. I was like, oh yeah, look, I'll write this least privilege policy. It won't take very long. It took a long time. And then I had to go back and update it, and I had to go back and I had to change it, and I had to really kind of do a lot more work than I thought I would have to do. And so that's when I realized, hey, maybe I can help other people do this too, so that they don't have to make all the same mistakes that I definitely made over the years.
And as an individual, what scale companies that you help?
Look, I don't know if I can share all the names here, but I think for me, the thing that I'm helping them with is
scale.
What's that?
The scale, like how big it is, like.
Yeah, so it's the scale. I mean, so many companies use AWS now, and because they all use IAM, I've helped small companies, individual, developers, all the way up to larger companies. Especially as a consultant, I was working with banks and government institutions and things like that, and just trying to help them. You need to spend time on this and you need to treat it seriously, but you also don't want to spend all your time on this. At the end of the day, this security is very important, but security on its own is not going to solve the business problem that you're using AWS to do, So I don't want my customers to spend all their time on AWS IAM, even though it might be good for me, say, hey, just, do this all the time. It's not good for their business to do that, so they need to find the balance between we need to solve some problems, we need to do the job that we came here to do, and we need to do it in a way that is secure. But, like I said, this is a problem that every AWS developer has, whether they know it or not. And so that's where part of what I'm doing now is just trying to make things easier for more people to do, So like, AWS has got an amazing amount of documentation, like just a ridiculous amount of documentation. Not many people have time to go through all of that documentation. And, at the same time, they might be wanting to build, as popular example today, they might want to build a Gen AI application. Well, there's a lot of Gen AI documentation that they need to read. Now they have to read the IAM documentation as well, and it's just a huge drain on their time. So part of what I'm working on now is, probably less on the consulting side of things, although I still do that. and more on the kind of education and training piece, and trying to scale things out to more and more developers, just because there are more and more people using AWS every day. It's not something that's, cloud in general is only going to become more and more mainstream as the years go by.
And how big it is? Yeah.
In what way? I mean, if we're to think about the number of IAM actions, so this is how you actually, grant permissions on AWS. I'm just checking right now. It looks like there's about 16,768 IAM permissions. Now, obviously, you don't need to know all of those specifically, but it just goes to show you that, there's a big surface area of things to work with. This is what kind of translates into taking actions on AWS. Hey, I want to create a server. I want to create a database. I want to be able to update the database. I want to be able to delete the database. Because everything in the cloud is, software defined, it's something that you then need to have permissions, and, IAM is a very granular permission system. So it's a good thing because it gives you a lot of power, but it's also maybe not a bad thing, but a challenging thing because you have so many things that you have to kind of worry about. A few years ago, there was the IAM's 10th anniversary, and I just need to check the actual number. But basically, so this was back in 2021. I'm just trying to work out. There was there's however many millions of requests that are made every second, and that number is always going to be a lot bigger now than it was back then. Just trying to find the exact number. Here we go. 400 million API calls per second is what it was doing 3 years ago. So it's going to be more than that now. So from a scale perspective, it's a very, very impressive system because it is, such a critical part of the AWS infrastructure.
So it's like a gateway to all the services
yeah, correct.
Amazon.
So if we talk about, I'm talking a lot about AWS IAM, which is the implementation for AWS. But if you think about IAM as a general concept, which is, actually very common across the industry. So it stands for Identity and Access Management. So you have the identity part is, also referred to as authorization. So this is where you say, hey, I'm Rowan and, I want to have access to this system. And so the system will authorize me by saying, who are you? What's something that only you know? And maybe what's something that only you have? So, who I am is my username. Could be an email address. It's just like a unique identifier. The thing that I know that hopefully no one else knows could be my password, a secret like that. And, that's considered basically the most basic level of authorization. Ideally, you'd add something in like, what's something that only you have? So this is an example of two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Could be a, number that I've generated on my phone, or it could be a hardware key that I have that I plug into my computer. And by using this and potentially even more pieces of information, it might be what IP address I'm connecting from, what my computer is, is it the computer that my company has issued me? All of this information goes into authorizing someone so they can at least talk to the system and not be treated as if they're some anonymous user on the internet. So that's the identity part. And then you have the access management. And this is what we call the, sorry, did I say authentication? That was all the authentication part. The next part is the authorizing part. I think I got those two mixed up. The next part is where you say, hey, can I actually do this particular action? And this is where I was talking before around, like creating a database, updating a database, deleting a database. These are all distinct actions that I can be either allowed or denied. You might say to someone, well, you're allowed to create and update a database, but I don't want to lose any data, so you're not allowed to delete any data. Maybe a better example could be S3, which is Amazon's blob storage service. So you might say, yep, you can create as much data as you want, but you can't delete any because I don't want to lose anything. Or you might say you can create things, but you can't actually read any other data because I don't want you to read data that other people have created. And there's many different ways you can do this depending upon your scenario. And so in the context of AWS, IAM takes care of both those things because they are quite, strongly related. You might have someone who, even if you're allowed to talk to the system, as in I have been, authenticated, then I may not be authorized to do a particular action because I'm not an admin or things like that. So this is, what the IAM service does, and it does this for all of the requests into AWS. So if you're talking to EC2 or RDS for a database or S3 for the objects, they all have to go through IAM to actually do the thing that you're requesting. Does that make sense?
Yes. So the applications belongs to different companies, which belongs to different industries. Not many leaders or company owners are aware of technology tools or services. Their technical team or they'll take the help of individual consultants like you. So how you are able to make them understand about the importance of IAM, also how it is going to be helpful for their business if they are using different services in AWS.
Sure. Yeah, so I think, a big part of it, if I think about like what developing applications were like before the cloud, usually you had operations that were here and they would build the server and they would, make sure the server was secure. And you'd have developers over here that would write the code and then they'd put the code on the server and it would just kind of run and it would inherit whatever access it was set up with. And that's, you can still kind of do that in the cloud, but, as I was talking earlier about the serverless example where now your code is the thing that has an identity. Your code has a level of access. And so for me, working with teams, especially in large organizations, but really it's not to do with the size of organization, but it's to do with more how much they want to take advantage of the cloud-based services. That usually means that they have to build up a better understanding about what the implications are, so you can't, you can't just throw your code into the cloud and hope for the best unless you give it admin access, and that's not good. That could be bad. You actually then have to go, okay, well, what services is my application talking to? Okay, it's talking to these services. It's not talking to these other services. So maybe I'll just deny those privileges. And so it means that the developers need to think a lot more about how their code is going to run, which, I think it's a good thing. I think it's good that developers think about their code like this, but it is extra work on the developers. In the past, they might have just outsourced that to their ops team and said, hey, don't bother me with security. But, the reality is we know that you have to be aware of security as a developer. Otherwise you might write code that is vulnerable to exploits and things like that. So you can't ignore security completely. So I think it's better that developers are aware and educated about, what they should do in order to build an application. And you see this on, the side of AWS, they have this idea of the well-architected framework where they say, hey, while you could just come and, throw your code into our EC2 instances and pretend like it's just a data center in the cloud, what you should do is design your applications to run in the cloud properly and to take advantage of, the benefits and the features, all of the services that the cloud has. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So you have been in technology, in the development side of the technology for a long time now. You are working individually and you are interacting with business, business people. So how is this like understanding business side of the technology now coming out from the development?
Yeah. Look, I think, we've definitely seen with the global pandemic, things have just become much more digital, much quicker than I think even those of us working in the industry thought it would be. I think I have been in the industry now for quite a long time. Not going to say that I'm old, but I am. Especially in technology terms, given how much things change. And so we've seen this, everyone, now walks around with a computer in their pocket. It also happens to make phone calls, but, it is basically just a computer. And when I started in my career, computers were giant boxes that lived under the desk, that not everyone had. I think we've just seen things become so much more digital, so much more quickly than I think any of us thought. And obviously that's a good thing for some things, the fact that we're having this conversation across the globe, talking about technology, I think is fantastic. There are some other things which are less good in terms of, how people use technology, and maybe they spend too much time on those little computers. So these are the kind of the challenges that we have. But I think, in the context of my work, we no longer talk about, should I use the cloud, or should my organization do stuff in the cloud? Should we get out of the data center or anything like that? Those were the conversations we used to have 10 years ago, because people were like, don't know if I should use cloud. I don't know if AWS is going to be around. Now everyone is using the cloud. And they're still doing their own thing in their data centers too, which makes sense for a lot of things. But it's more a question now of how should we use the cloud? What are we actually going to put in the cloud? What are we not going to put in the cloud? If we put it there, what's the priority? Is the priority to be really fast? Okay, well, you can do that in the cloud. It might cost you more though. Or is the priority we want to be really available? Or is the priority we want to be really cheap? We don't want to spend too much money on this. So it's more of a conversation around now for quite a long time. Not going to say that I'm old, but I am. Especially in technology terms, given how much things change. And so we've seen this, everyone, now walks around with a computer in their pocket. It also happens to make phone calls, but, it is basically just a computer. And when I started in my career, computers were giant boxes that lived under the desk, that not everyone had. I think we've just seen things become so much more digital, so much more quickly than I think any of us thought. And obviously that's a good thing for some things, the fact that we're having this conversation across the globe, talking about technology, I think is fantastic. There are some other things which are less good in terms of, how people use technology, and maybe they spend too much time on those little computers. So these are the kind of the challenges that we have. But I think, in the context of my work, we no longer talk about, should I use the cloud, or should my organization do stuff in the cloud? Should we get out of the data center or anything like that? Those were the conversations we used to have 10 years ago, because people were like, don't know if I should use cloud. I don't know if AWS is going to be around. Now everyone is using the cloud. And they're still doing their own thing in their data centers too, which makes sense for a lot of things. But it's more a question now of how should we use the cloud? What are we actually going to put in the cloud? What are we not going to put in the cloud? If we put it there, what's the priority? Is the priority to be really fast? Okay, well, you can do that in the cloud. It might cost you more though. Or is the priority we want to be really available? Or is the priority we want to be really cheap? We don't want to spend too much money on this. So it's more of a conversation around how to do these things, not if we should do them. I think that's what I've seen.
And now you are, into business and trying to understand different businesses. You already have this technical skills. So how is this trying to understand the business side and knowing how that business, will be integrated to cloud and use AWS services?
Yeah, look, I think it's just one of those things where it's all about having the conversation, and hopefully having the conversation at the right time. Being potentially having more conversations before you start writing code than writing code as quickly as possible, which is something that, developers, myself included, we want to just write code. Like I said before, most developers think my job is to write code. And I think it's not. I think your job is to solve problems. and you just happen to use code to do it, or you're picking certain problems that are well suited to use code. Ideally, personally, I write as little code as possible, because if you write a line of code, then you have to look after it. You should probably be testing it. You have to worry about the security of it, some of these things that I help teams and developers with. But the best line of code is the line that you don't write, because that doesn't cost you anything in the future. So for me, it's definitely about having that conversation, ideally with the customers of who, the problems you're trying to solve, and then working backwards from that and using as little code as possible. We're all going to write some code. We are going to do that. It's just, it shouldn't be our first thing. It should be, something that happens because we have to, not because we have nothing else to do.
Every business wants, their data and their application and their business to be safe. And you took that subject as a major thing, and trying to help businesses, how important it is to be at the industry and also to make business for a long time. So how is that? And, to actually, thinking about actually the heart of the business, the security.
Yeah, look, I think, it really is. We're seeing it a lot more, obviously, in this new Gen AI world that we live in, where, you need the data to make, AI actually kind of useful and relevant. There's an implication. If you put the data somewhere, then you should look after that. I know that's how I want my data to be treated. So, I would hope that most organizations treat that data with the appropriate concern. Like you said, it's kind of the heart. It's really, data is the differentiator for most businesses. Actually, making a website, making a mobile app, this is no longer a differentiator. Maybe it was 10, 15 years ago, but these days anyone can have one of those if they really want it. The thing that makes businesses unique and will keep them unique is, the level of data that they have access. And, like I said, if it was my data, which some of it is, I hope it's being, cared for and looked after for. And I think that's another reason why I kind of work in this space, is because we're not going to have any less data in, our systems, in the cloud, in applications and things like that. It's only going to be more and more. It's kind of like what I was saying earlier about how during the pandemic, we just had more and more things got digitalized, for better or worse. There's so much data out there about all of us and about, the other things in our world. So we should really take care of that and ensure that it's only used for the things it was intended to be used, and it's used in a way that is, hopefully constructive and not harmful. And so again, that's where I think the security part for me made sense for me to focus on this, because it's something that, I can definitely help organizations with. And it's not like this problem is going to disappear. Unfortunately, one of the key takeaways I've had about security, especially security in the cloud, is that it's not just a, do it once and then forget about it kind of thing. When things were in the data centers, we kind of pretended like, hey, I'll secure it and then I don't need to worry about it. That was probably the wrong way of thinking about it. But I think the timelines were much longer. If I did it correctly in the data center, I probably didn't have to touch it again for a few years, because the rate of change was so slow. Now in the cloud, the rate of change is sped up. I get updates, security updates, new, run times and things like that. So the rate of change has, for better or worse, increased, which means the security implications have increased too. You can't just say, yep, I've written the least privilege policy, now I don't ever need to think about this again, and you might be able to ignore it for a little while if your code doesn't change, if your requirements don't change, if you don't touch anything, but you can't ignore it forever, and I've seen this working with plenty of customers. They haven't touched their Lambda functions for a while, and now they can't update them because their runtime's been deprecated, or if they're running on servers, their operating system patches are out of date. So you can ignore that for a little while, but you can't make it go away. And it's even more important now that so much data is ultimately online and connected.
So can you share some of your important experiences that you had with AWS and the businesses that you work for?
Yeah, sure. Look, that's a big question. You know, like I said, I've been working with AWS pretty much exclusively now for 10 years, and before that, I was using it for other contexts, and so there's a lot of learnings in there. I think the key one that's kind of relevant to what I'm working on these days is just including security relatively early on in the process. Maybe not at the beginning, although you probably want to have a bit of an idea, but not leaving it till the very end, which is how, some projects are sometimes set up. They're like, all right, well, we'll do all the coding and we'll solve all the problems for the customer, which is great. And then we'll just do security at the end. And unfortunately, that doesn't always go very smoothly because things come out of that. They go, well, you're doing this in a really insecure way. You can't go live. You can't do this in production. You can't do this with customers' data. Now you're going to have to rework it. And part of that comes back to things like the well-architected framework. If you follow those principles, generally you'll have a much smoother process. You'll have to do less rework. So I think, including security earlier on. And I mean, like I said before, writing as little code as possible, is a thing. Now, like I said, you're not going to avoid writing code at all. That's not the point. But, in the context of AWS, you might try and use some of the managed services rather than building your own, especially in the early days of projects. Use as many managed services, even if they're not perfect for your particular scenario. If you can get away with using a managed service, do it, because that's going to be the shortest path to value in terms of time. And if you have the requirement later on to come back and say, no, this service just doesn't cut it, it doesn't work, we do need to build our own solution, then do that then, because there'll be other problems that you'll come across, usually pretty far down the project, that you simply don't have a managed service for, and you simply have to build yourself custom. So save your valuable engineering time and effort for those problems rather than reinventing the wheel, if you don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are just something I've seen many teams make that same problem again and again, is that they run into the first little thing and they go, oh, well, this managed service, it's not absolutely perfect. It's only 80% of what we need. So we'll build our own. And it's like, well, 80% is probably good enough. And then when you get further down the road and you find that problem where the managed service is only 10% of what you need, that's the thing that you're going to have to spend your engineering time on. And we all get the same amount of time in the day. So, you've got to be very careful with where you spend your time and effort.
You have seen the 10 years before, software development, and now you are seeing. So what is going to be after 10 years?
Sorry, what was that last bit?
From past 10 years, you are seeing the development and also the deployment. And you're helping, how to run businesses online, especially in cloud and using AWS services. So, what is going to be, after 10 years? How
the next 10 years. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Look, I think we're seeing the beginning of it with all the Gen AI, activity that we have now. It feels like we're still pretty early on in that space. There's a lot of talk. There is some impressive results, but there's still obviously some work to be done. So I think, the next 10 years, if I had to make a prediction, I'm not going to go with anything too crazy. It's going to be more of the same. We're going to be more online. We're going to have more data online. Hopefully we're going to reduce the barriers to writing good applications and good secure systems so that we can get better at that over time. I definitely, I know at least here in Australia, there's been a few, big security breaches in various organizations for various reasons. And I think people are now, for better or worse, more aware of the security implications. Like, what is the cost if you don't get security right? At the beginning of the project, when everything's still brand new, security seems like a big pain and a big cost. It's like, do we have to do that? And what we're finding out, down the line, and it might not be, in that initial project period, it might be years after, yeah, you do need to worry about security, because if you don't, it will come back and it will bite you, and it won't be good. So I think, we're just going to see, unfortunately, more and more of that, where organizations, teams, applications maybe didn't prioritize security, and that might end up poorly for them, and that will result in a bit more of learning lessons the hard way, that yes, you need to build security in to your applications if you want them to kind of go well over a long period of time. So that's what I can kind of see in the next decade.
So, what do you see? I mean, if you compare yourself, you as a developer 10 years ago and today, so what change that you are seeing in yourself as a developer?
Yeah, sure. Look, I've touched on a few of them already. I think 10 years ago, I definitely wanted to write as much code as possible. Now I write a lot less code. For me, I think I also, I'm trying to think of a nice way to put this, For now, these days I use a lot more kind of like linting in my code. So this is where you kind of run an automated check to say, oh, this is like inconsistent. Whereas 10 years ago, I might have wanted my code to be kind of unique, oh, no, I'm going to write this myself. It's going to look like Rowan did it. And that gets embarrassing when you make a mistake, when you do something terrible. It's like, oh, who did this? Oh, obviously it was Rowan, because, he's doing something silly. Whereas now, I really like things like Prettier.js, and Black, the Python code formatter. Those are the main languages I'm using today, because they just say, write whatever code you want and we'll format it the right way, and maybe we'll flag these particular issues, like, do you really need to do that? Using kind of, more of those clever code constructs. I've definitely moved away from that, and now I just kind of value simplicity, because I just find that to be easier for everyone to understand, including myself, when I come back to my code in a couple of months' time and I'm like, what's going on here? Why is this code doing this? This is so confusing. What idiot wrote this? Oh, wait, it was me. Once you do that to yourself a few times, you start to go, hey, maybe we should just keep it simple and, spend a bit more time writing some documentation or some tests for that code, rather than trying to, minimize the number of characters used and things like that, which can be fun to do sometimes as an exercise. But not something that I necessarily prioritize now like I did 10 years ago. I think the other thing that I learned over the years that I actually try and share with other people is, wherever possible, I always throw out the first version of my code, So if I have, I've got to solve this problem, I'm going to use code for it, First of all, I double check, do I actually need to use code to solve this problem? And then I go, yes, I do. Okay, I'll have a go at it. And then within the first 24 to 48 hours, ideally, I will literally throw it all out and I will start again. Because usually you learn so much in the very beginning of solving a problem that, and it's still fresh in your mind, it's not like you have to think back, to months ago. It's like, no, I did this yesterday, but I can do it better today. And I've actually found that to make me more of a productive developer, even though it does feel kind of weird to like throw things out, I don't just take it and then, rewrite it. I literally start from scratch, go again. And I just find that gives me a lot better results, because, like I said, you learn a lot so much in the first couple of hours or days of a project, about things that you thought were one way, but are actually not. So yeah, that's another kind of technique that I wish I'd known 10 years ago, but I definitely did not know that.
So today, businesses, came a lot into the internet space. So there are so many applications that are being running, and especially in AWS. So 10 years ago, it was a different number. So when it comes to the security, because you are working on security and you have already published a book on it in order to understand, in order to make developers understand the importance of it, and also the business owners to understand how crucial it is to use services, going through this as a gateway. So in business perspective, how do you define, the change that happened?
Yeah,
in these years?
sure. Look, I think, we've just seen a much bigger adoption of cloud, so like I mentioned earlier that, 10 years ago, we really had to convince businesses, yes, you should look at using the cloud. You should consider using the cloud, whereas, I worked with a bunch of startups where we used the cloud because it was just the most economical way to do things. You didn't have to buy all of your servers up front and put them into a data center and worry about all that. Eventually you did have to worry about those things, but in the early days you said, hello, Amazon, I'd like a server, please. And they said, here you go, you can have it now. Do you just want it for a few hours or a few days or a few years? And so it was really much more common in the startup space to use AWS. But over the years, bigger organizations and enterprises started to see that benefit. And I think a lot of it was eventually driven from the business side, because you said, hey, business, person who's trying to solve a problem, if we do this the normal way, the traditional way, getting a server in a data center, you might have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to buy a nice big server that we will use, for the lifetime of this project. Or you could pay, 50 cents an hour to get one over here. And the business person isn't maybe sure about how their budget's going to be for next year and things like that. Then they could be like, yep, let's go with the cheap option for now. And we can worry about the, the long-term stuff in the long term. So being able to kind of change that decision-making point was one of the key value propositions of the cloud. In some cases, it also meant that they could get access to resources that they couldn't get normally, because you can say, hey, I'd like a really big database server, and that might not be easy for the company to, as an example, to provision that. So I think, ultimately the cloud adoption that we've seen over the last 10 years has been driven by the business case, behind it. Developers like to try new things, new shiny things and write code, but they can only do it, as part of their job when the business agrees and pays for it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And what do you say about automation taking place?
Lots of things about automation. No, it's look, it's definitely one of the benefits of the cloud as well, because everything is just an API call away. I think the key thing that I learned about automation, in the early days, I used to do it just for its own sake. I just like, yep, if we can automate it, we should automate it. These days, I'm a little bit more pragmatic about it, where you should only automate the things you're going to do multiple times. If you're just going to do something once, don't automate it. And it's just not worth it. Twice, no, probably still not worth it. 3, 4, 5, yeah, okay, now maybe you think about automation, because really automation doesn't give you anything for free. It just makes you front load the work, and then after that, you get the benefit. So it's more of an investment. So if you know that you're going to do something repeatedly or, many times, then you should invest in that, and you'll see a return on that investment. But if you're never going to come back again and do it again, then why would you invest in it? Something that you're only going to do once or maybe twice. So that's something that, like I said, I've definitely fallen into that trap where you go like, oh, is it possible to automate it? Yes. All right, let's do it. And you end up, potentially doing more work than just doing it manually would cost you. So I try not to make that mistake anymore. And I do unfortunately see a lot of people making that mistake. But that's something I definitely try to talk people out of, because I learned that one the hard way.
Business requirements changes, constantly. The things that are, working today may not work next year or, next 5 years or next 10 years. It's a constant change that is happening. So with the technology skill set that you have, developed, how you are able to help, the businesses, adopt their businesses to the technology services, especially AWS. So how you are able to understand them, the importance, how you integrate business requirements with technology tools and services.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Look, that to me is another benefit of using the cloud, and why I personally like the cloud. So I started my career racking servers, maintaining servers, splicing networking cables. These are all things that I've done in the past for my job. And when the cloud came along and meant that I didn't have to do that, I was like, sweet, I'm gonna go all in on this. I'm gonna use that. And I think one of the key benefits to your point and to your question around how requirements change, because you're not actually building physical infrastructure, you can turn it off later on, and so that's where I think, to me, kind of like the security piece, where what we used to do is like, oh no, we're going to build this application that's going to run for 3, 5, 10 years, hopefully. But we obviously didn't know that for sure, but we kind of built it as if it would when we were building physical hardware, partly because it was just so expensive to do, the time from an engineer's perspective, buying servers. Oh, have I lost you? Oh,
Yeah,
you're back. Buying servers, these are all things that cost a lot of money, so you wanted to do it right. Whereas in the cloud, I can build a system, run it for a year, 2 years, whatever, and then I can turn it off and stop paying for that service. I'm not invested in it until the hardware breaks. So the benefit of the cloud is definitely doing that, and you see that taken, to an even further extreme in the context of serverless applications, because you have your code here that you basically pay nothing for if it's not running, versus, in the, on-premises world, you had to build a server and the server will sit there and, you're effectively paying for it all the time, even if you're not doing anything, even if your project's requirements change, if your project gets cancelled or whatever, the server is still there. You've already paid for it. Whereas in the serverless world, you can just say, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And if it gets lots of traffic because it's very popular, fantastic, and, you deal with that as a problem, but that's a good problem to have. But if it doesn't, or if it's very low traffic, and maybe it's just a low traffic problem, well, then you pay for what you use. And so that, to me, again, is one of the key reasons why you would use the cloud. Because it just gives you a lot more flexibility with how you solve your problems. It gives you kind of another dimension that you can work with when you're building solutions to business problems.
So you are into security. How a business which has less users and a business which has millions of users. How different it is working for applications which has different scale of users, and especially comes to because using security thing for it.
Yeah. Look, from my perspective, I would say that the security situation is very similar. I wouldn't necessarily be making security decisions based on the number of users or the scale of a system, because even if you have a low traffic kind of application, a small number of users, that doesn't really have anything to do with the sensitivity of the data. You might be talking about, hey, I've got some, I'm building a healthcare system. People only interact with this system when they go to the hospital, but it's got their healthcare in it, and hopefully that's not very many times. Hopefully they're not accessing it every day or every week or every month or every year even. Hopefully they only have to access this system very, very infrequently because they're not going to the hospital. But the data is going to be very, very sensitive. So you wouldn't want to say, oh, well, they don't use it very often, so we don't need to worry about security. And then the flip side is, imagine a system like Twitter or X for that matter, where people are accessing it all the time, but it's all public information, basically. Not all of it, but the vast majority is all public. So your security profile really has nothing to do with the scale that you're working at. It really comes back to the problem you're solving, the sensitivity of the data, like is ultimately the heartbeat of the business is the data. So that's really what should be driving your security considerations. And also your appetite to risk, like if you run a system that has payment information, well, then you need to treat that appropriately, just like health information as an example. But if you don't have any payment information because you've outsourced that to some other provider, well, then you've got a lot easier job to deal with.
You have been a great communicator with the system, with the lifeless machines called computers before, as a developer. now you are communicating with humans. So how different it is, and what is which is more easier and more
That's a great question. Yeah, look, I think yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think humans definitely are harder to communicate with because you aren't always sure, what level of experience people have, and I definitely suffer from this where, I've been working with AWS for so long. I've been working with IAM for so long. I wrote a book, I read the manual. And so there's some things to me that just seem obvious because this is what I do. But if you're a developer that just started working with AWS this year, it's not going to be obvious to you. And so I sometimes forget or I have blind spots around like, oh, this is how this particular piece of IAM behaves. That's obvious to me. But remembering that that's not obvious to everyone is one of the challenges I have. And, being able to kind of make my content relevant to different levels of experience. At least with a computer, you're writing code, you get pretty quick feedback around, oh, it doesn't compile, all right, I made a mistake, let's fix it, or if I'm, running those linting tools I was talking about, they'll just give you feedback immediately within, milliseconds, literally, that you've got something wrong or something doesn't make sense. So that's, they're very, very different problems. As much as they both are communication problems, they're very, very different from each other.
And you saw the evolution of technology, since you're working from a long time. And how do you define, where we are as a human beings in solving, logistic problems, and how much intelligence we have today, because we are working on AI, and technology companies are working on AI.
No, that's a big one. Look, I definitely don't feel qualified to answer that question. I think, the key takeaway I had from, this explosion of Gen AI, in particular the large language models, and I was having this discussion with a colleague sometime last year where I think we all thought that solving language would be like something that computers would do right before we had, real artificial intelligence. Because I guess we thought, human language, it's so complicated, it's so hard to understand. But I guess what we found out that it really, if you have enough data, and obviously we're talking about ridiculous amounts of data that we can't even comprehend, you can solve the language problem. And I know for me, I realized that, we all kind of just assumed that was going to be one of the last problems solved, not one of the first problems solved. So I think it just goes to show, maybe we're not as good at predicting technology trends as we'd like to think we are. And so now we have a very different world than, what we thought we would have even just a few years ago. That being said, I still think there's a lot of problems that need to be solved, and I hope technology will solve them, but I think it will take longer than we think. Again, using this example, we thought language was going to be very, very hard for computers to solve. Turns out it wasn't. Well, what else are we wrong about? Are there some problems that we thought, we'll probably solve this problem in the next few years with enough data and enough computational power? Maybe we won't. Maybe some of these problems are a lot harder to solve than we think they are. We can get it wrong both ways. Some can be easier to solve and some can be harder to solve. So yeah, that's about the limit of my expertise.
And why cloud? And how many AWS services have you explored?
How many? So I've only really worked with the AWS Cloud. How many services I wouldn't be able to tell you. There's quite a few services now, although a few are being deprecated. So that's interesting. That hasn't happened historically. But it would be a couple of hundred, I think, over the years. But most of the activity is focused in some of those core services like IAM, EC2, Lambda, Dynamo, RDS. These are the core services that I use day to day and is like the bulk of my work. But then there's obviously some other services, Bedrock and Connect and some of these less common but still very useful services that also form a decent part of what I spend my time doing.
And how AWS is thinking? when it comes to
from
business, understanding different businesses and trying to provide the services which helps them to solve their problems with the developers like you.
Yeah, look, I mean, you'd have to talk to someone from AWS, but my understanding is that they always kind of have this idea of customer obsession and then working backwards, so they find out, okay, what are customers, trying to do? And then they work back from that and try and solve that problem. And that's how we end up with a lot of the services that we have. So, this is something that I know they're continually doing, and kind of refining. And, look, it seems to be working so far. As a developer, I'm very happy with the services I have. Although, you'd have to, things do feel like they've slowed down a bit over the last few years, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't always need a completely new service, in order to do my job. On some level, I want to spend less time learning about new AWS services and more time using the ones I already know to solve business problems. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
The similar answer I got when I interviewed AWS Vice President Jeff Parks of the US.
Yeah. No, look, and they're pretty open about their process, and it seems to work for them. The way that they've kind of built up all of those services over the years. They don't just kind of wake up one day and say, oh, we're going to build a service that does blah. It's usually, they talk to a lot of customers, and if 1,000 customers say, hey, I'm having a problem doing X, well, it's a no-brainer from their perspective. From a business perspective, it's like, well, if we build X, then, not Twitter, we need to use a different letter. If we build the solution to this problem, we know that we'll have at least 1,000 customers, and hey, they're probably indicative of, other problems or other customers that are having this same problem in the market. And, I think it's one of those things which, AWS is in a very good position because they have a lot of customers already. So they talk to these customers and they hear the same pain points. So, they've got a pretty good model, that they can work with there.
And do you have a message to the AWS business developer?
From the AWS side? No, look, I think as long as the services that we have keep running, at least the main ones, I'm pretty happy. I talk to some of the AWS developers and service teams and things like that. I think I'd like to make sure that they do deliver on the promises. Sometimes services get announced or features get announced at reInvent, but you can't use them just yet, and so as long as they follow through with the things, they do the things they say they're going to do when they do them, I'll be happy. The worst part is knowing that something's coming, but also knowing that it's not here yet. It's like, well, I don't want to build the solution to this problem myself because I know you're working on it, but you're not giving it to me. So I'm stuck in between a rock and a hard place. I want to know that I actually get the things that have been promised, even though it's not a literal promise, the things that they said they're going to do.
So how people can find you if anybody wants to take your help for their business?
Yeah, cool. So look, I do most of my writing on my blog, which is just at rowanudell.com. Hopefully my name's showing up here, so it's easy for people to spell. I wrote my book, The Practical AWS IAM Guide. It's at awsiamguide.com. And I'm also about to do a webinar kind of masterclass series online about writing least privilege policies. I'll be talking about that on LinkedIn and also on Twitter as well.
Can you spell it to my podcast listeners?
Yeah, sure. So it's rowanudell.com, rowanudell.com. Just my name, first name, last name.com. So yeah.
And Charles, what is your observation about my work? Have you seen any videos of me on YouTube?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've been in contact for a while. It took a little bit while for me to get organized, but like I said, I think it's a great use of technology. What you're doing, reaching out to people, engaging with them, talking about these topics. I just think it's fantastic that you are able to do this, and it's a testament to you to do this on your own and to kind of have these interesting conversations because if it just helps, a handful of people, then it will have been worthwhile. Like each video, me coming on this video, just to be a part of this is cool. And if it helps people, in their job or, make some decisions about how they want to use technology, then I think that's a great thing.
I have done masters in software engineering, also bachelors in computer science and engineering. Right now, I'm working as DevOps engineer, AWS DevOps engineer. So I use
Good to hear.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
no.
use AWS services.
So I've got a question for you, Chat. So so what is your favorite AWS service and your least favorite AWS service, and why?
I have used the fundamental services like you have mentioned, the S3. IAM is my favorite actually.
Yes, good
Giving
answer.
those.
And what is your least favorite service?
So I have not yet explored much yet, but I have started it. But whatever the services that I have been using, it can be storage or computer,
Yeah.
networking.
But is
It
there one
feels
that you
very
don't
better
like? What service don't you like? What service is hard to use or maybe gave you some error messages? Is there any services?
I think S3, like
S3.
S3.
Yeah. I think for S3, the thing that really helped me is, even though you can see like folders, like directories, there's no directories. They don't exist. It's all just, it's a key value store, and once I realized that, it became much easier to use. Whereas when I first started, I thought, I just want to look, at all my objects in this directory, and you end up having to list everything, unless you have it structured the right way. Or like I want to search for a particular file. It's like, no, you can't do that. You can just get all of them and then look through that list yourself. It's like, that's too many objects. Anyway, so that was the thing there. But good answers. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and your observation means a lot to me because you have been in the development side of the technology, and now you're also understanding the business side of the technology and helping businesses. So how this experience trying to interact with the different business owners, CEOs, CFOs, or CROs, and engineers, architects. That I'm trying to explore different positions in technology from different parts of the world. More than 100 countries experts I have interviewed in last
Yeah.
3 years, and 750 interviews I have done. So how this communication, global communication is going to contribute or helpful for me in my career?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I think it's just so different to, what the beginning of my career looked like. So I can only think and imagine what it's like. I would hope, as you, continue doing this, you'd be in a good position to maybe write a book or to do some kind of, review of the things that you've learned, and the things that people do differently. I think, in the space that we're in, some things are going to be very similar. I know for me, being in Australia, obviously we're similar to America, but we're also different as well, in terms of, even just the spelling, it's something I had to worry about for my book. The way I spell words is not the same the way as, the Americans spell words, and that was most of my audience. So there's definitely some cultural things there that are still different, and I'm sure you have your own examples. So it'd be really interesting to know kind of across all of your interviews, what kind of things stand out to you, and in what ways are we all the same, and what ways are we all a little bit different. I think I'd be really keen to hear that. And I think, at this stage of your career, when you're relatively early on, just trying things is like the best thing that you can do. And you're doing that, and you're having these conversations. And I think, it's kind of hard to point at it and say, oh, well, now you know how to do this, this, and this because you talk to these people. I think it'll be more a case of when you come across things in your career, you'll just have a much better, decision-making process, and you'll feel more comfortable with your decisions because you've had these conversations and been exposed to different ideas and different people and ultimately cultures.
So today, of course, about IAM, I came to know about how it is going to be very important,
Mm-hmm. That's it.
I've been certain, yeah, from talking with you.
Yeah.
So,
Like I said, it's the only service you have to use. Doesn't matter what
yes.
you're doing, functions, containers, servers, networking, you still got to talk to IAM.
Can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Yeah, sure.
And also, can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yeah.
So I hope your work reaches everyone, and I hope your contribution helps a lot of developers and also different businesses. And I hope your work will help a lot of human beings to solve their problems.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank
Likewise.
you, sir. Thank you, sir. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. Bye.